Watch my
Resume
language.
recording. Okay, we have red lights, so it means we are recording.
Outstanding.
It's always interesting to go back and re-listen, and you kind of listen to the pre-webinar chatter. And so my job, and though it's not officially my job, our friends at Spark have offered to do so, but I go and delete all that, but no other editing that goes into that. What we're going to do, Bryan, we're going to give it probably a couple minutes, and then we'll get started. Does that work okay for you?
Absolutely. Okay. Would you say I have time to top off my my coffee?
Yes, you do.
Excuse me, I'll be right back.
Thank you.
Force you to stare at a blank room. All right, be right back.
Good morning, Katie. We're glad you're with us, I should say. Katie, I want you to do me a favor. When you are home next, we will exercise social distancing, but I think you know we're 2 doors down from parents. I'd love to just to kind of say, hey, in person next time you're in town. So I know we've exchanged LinkedIn messages, but just know that's an open invite. Good morning, William G. We're glad you're with us. We've got some folks joining us, and Dan's got his priorities right. He's filling up his coffee cup. So we'll be starting here in just a moment. I guess you can't start without Bryan, so we'll just sit here and stare at the screen, wait for Bryan to come back.
Now you don't have to stare at a screen. I'll give you my lovely face right now.
Yeah, I'd rather have
Now. Well, we were talking earlier about the voice for radio. I've been told I have a face for radio as well.
You're being modest. You're quite handsome this morning without makeup and everything.
Exactly. A little pancake, please.
You know, they don't do that anymore. Pancake.
I'm afraid I wouldn't
the lights are not nearly so hot. And I'll make it one quick story and I'll hush. I had an uncle who spent a career in newscasting. He was a newscaster. He was in charge of the evening news. And so growing up, he would come home after doing that and he would be all pancaked up. He's the one who wore makeup in the family, Uncle Ray. So I tell you what we're going to do. We are going to be respectful of everybody's time. And so what I'd like to do is we'll take just a moment. And if you're ready, Bryan, and if you're ready, Rhonda, I'll take a pause and then we'll get started. So are you ready, Bryan?
I am.
Good. And Rhonda, are you ready?
I'm ready. Sounds good.
Okay, good. We'll give it just about 30 seconds and we'll get started, everybody. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Business Building Q&A. I'm Mike O'Neill with Bench Builders, and I'll again be your host for today's Q&A session. Joining us today from Seattle, Washington is our expert panelist, Bryan Rutberg. Good early morning, Bryan.
Very good morning to you all, Mike, Rhonda, and all of those joining us.
We are recording this live. It's 10 o'clock Eastern, means it's 7 in the morning for Bryan. So we're glad you're with us. We also have Rhonda Beard. You'll be hearing from Rhonda in a bit more detail in a few minutes. But Rhonda today is going to be sharing some tips on how you can, as leaders, build the skill sets of the folks that you lead to get the results that you're actually kind of looking for. So welcome back, Rhonda.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks for joining us, Bryan. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and glad everybody's on this morning.
Well, we are too. Just for those who are new to this, we launched this Q&A session to help folks like you, business owners, key leaders, HR professionals, stay on top of kind of what's happening. And what's happening is happening so fast, it's harder and harder to stay on top of it. So we hope that these Q&A sessions will help you do just that, enabling you to build your business. I wanted to just kind of remind you what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be recording our time together. So everybody who has registered will be getting the recording. It will also have the slides that we'll be using today. But the nature of what we do and how we do it is pretty much determined by you. Namely, this is less of a webinar and much more of a conversation. It's a Q&A, and the conversation is driven by you, your questions. So if you've not done so already, go to the chat box, open the chat box, and on the blue drop down, use the all panelists and attendees and type in the questions that you have. And what I'll do is while we're going along, I'll be monitoring that, and to the best of my ability, what I will do is try to work your questions in while we're together live this morning. So with that being said, I'd like to go ahead and just kind of move to what is it we are going to be doing today. I don't know about you, but what we're hearing from our clients is COVID has hit and hit hard. And it has particularly made it very difficult to reach out to potential new customers. And if that is the case, then what should we be doing? And when I met Bryan probably a couple months back, I understood Bryan to be a customer connection expert. And I figured he would be a great person to have with us today to kind of give us a sense of what does it take to have a customer relationship that is really meaningful. And in today's economic climate, acknowledging how difficult it is to even get new customers. So I hope you will find that Bryan is as obvious choice as we think he's going to be. And what I'd like to do is let's just get started on this. Bryan, I'd like to kind of give you a chance. I know you, but how would you like us to know about who you are and what 3C Communications does for its clients?
Thank you very much, and just delighted to be with you. I've enjoyed watching and listening in on several of these that you've been doing in the few months that we've known each other, and it's an honor and a pleasure to be joining you. I think you hit it. That how I'd like to be thought of is a customer connection, customer relationship guru. I have a real passion for building strong business relationships. Some of that comes from my own personal background. I've always been a good communicator, a relationship builder in my personal life. And I've had the chance to fall in love with a couple of brands over the years that I have participated with in something greater than just what feels like just a commercial relationship. I'm not one of those who is nuts about his Harley Davidson motorcycle, because I don't have one of those. I'm not one of those who buys every new Air Jordan shoe that Nike comes out with, but I've studied that particular case, that particular case and that subculture of folks. But I have had the privilege of working for a couple of global brands and helping build strong customer relationships in the high technology space. And as a personal user of certain brands, yeah, I've probably gone off the deep end a little bit, making sure that I've got the latest, newest whenever it comes out, or participated with certain brands that I love or products that I really enjoy and feel are valuable as everything from beta tester to recommender and spokesperson to press and analysts. So my personal life and passions and my business life and passions have managed to merge nicely. And what I'm doing now with 3C is think about 3 Cs. You can call us the Customer Connection Company. I tend to work with medium-sized companies that have got the opportunity to look at their current customer base as the engine for their continued growth and build stronger relationships, both to get them more revenue, but also to start stoking the fires to bring them more new business as well.
I'm attempting, while you're speaking here, to pull up the slides that I asked you to provide us, and I hope that people can see what is it I'm doing right now. One of the things I've asked Bryan to do is kind of walk us through a little bit. And so here's a slide. Let me see if I can get this so it's full screen. Are you seeing a full screen?
Not yet.
Okay, so let me see if I can go back to
we had your
sharing.
desktop there for just a moment. And of course, we had the slides before that.
Thank you. I'm going to probably stop doing that and just leave it like it is, because all I've done is invited trouble for that.
Oh, there you
Now,
go.
I'm
Got it.
screen sharing. If I do this, hopefully we're going to be making this a little bit bigger. But one of the things I ask you to do is kind of walk us through, how do you work with your customers? And this slide you gave me helped me a lot. So would you mind walking us through that?
Absolutely. The heart of building great customer relationships is in the conversations that you have with them and the communications that you use. And I'd encourage you, for the purposes of our entire time together today, to, when you hear the word customer, please feel free to insert your internal or external customer of choice. Because sometimes, of course, this means you're speaking to your employees because they are consumers of your brand whom you want to be happy and sticking around, or partners, or investors. I've worked with different clients on different programs and projects around each of these distinct audiences. But mostly, it's customers, where you can track things like retention numbers, lifetime customer value, net promoter scores, things of that nature. So 3C, and through me as the front man, really does 3 or 4 things. First, I do a certain amount of speaking and appearing to share what I know, as we're doing here. I don't mean I'm appearing to share what I know. I mean, I do appearances to share what I know. And in addition to the speaking tends to support the coaching and training work, and then the consulting work that I do. When I'm coaching or training, I'm often working with executives or early career folks on the coaching side to help them become better business communicators, focusing on audience-focused, benefit-led language, and then building their personal presentation skills and their business writing skills. The workshops, the trainings, tend to be more of that, as well as focusing on communication specifically around customer acquisition and especially customer retention. So it's taking communications as a baseline and then thinking about how to get those communications out there and what kinds of programs to run in order to really get those customers to feel like they're going from one-time customers to two-time customers to frequent repeat customers, and then making the jump from repetition to loyalty and advocacy. And where that work takes its full expression is when we get out of the training room, or the training Zoom room these days, and we get into consulting engagements with clients, where the problem statement I'm frequently faced with is, we're losing customers too quickly, we don't hang on to them long enough, or we know that we should be getting greater customer lifetime value, or we're starting to get to be a bigger organization, we need to think about doing more farming and not necessarily less hunting for new customers, but now it's time to really accelerate the growth in size and loyalty of our existing customer base, because we, the organization, have plans that involve getting more referrals, building a stronger book of references, and even putting our customers, everything from on stages to in front of press and analysts. And that's where I like to come in and lend a hand.
Bryan, that is in large part why we very much want to have you with us today. And that is, what we are seeing out there is sales, as sales was being done, has had to change dramatically. And as a result, there has been maybe a little more willingness to step back and kind of go, we're chasing new customers. Are we perhaps leaving, I hate to use the term, but for lack of a better term, are we leaving opportunities on the table with our own existing? And you actually spoke to that, and I want to see if I can advance this slide, because this is the data you kind of shared with me a few weeks ago, just knocked my socks off. Can you walk us through that?
Well, and I assure you, this that we're going to go through right now is just a very small sliver of the data that's out there supporting the need to work your existing customer base so that you can get growth out of it. The conversation I like to have with folks goes beyond growing your customer lifetime value. Clearly, that's important. That's what impacts your top and your bottom line. But it starts to get to the actions that loyal customers, that customers who turn into fans and advocates, can take on your behalf that go beyond their spend with you. And those include the things I've mentioned earlier, referrals and references, and getting to be put in front of press or analysts or other influencers in your marketplace, and extend all the way into, these are the people who will tell you the unvarnished truth about how they feel being served by you. I've helped set up customer advisory councils. I've stopped counting, focus groups for clients, all to help them get the voice of their customer more into their own heads for their strategy and planning. But let's just look for a moment at the numbers on this slide. Take the two big numbers on the slide first. A loyal customer, whether it's out of habit or a feeling of loyalty, however you get them to loyalty, 80% more likely to choose you over competitors. So they're effectively blocking your competitors' messages, and they are open to yours. 80% of loyal customers come back to you again and again. It becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. And of course, they're on the bottom right, the bottom left. They're twice as likely to say nice things about you to others and recommend your brand to customers. And I say the word brand, and of course, I've worked with law firms. I've had a chance to work with some folks in the medical profession. This is not necessarily a business to consumer brand. This can be a business to business brand, or even an individual in the professional services space. Look at the top left. In the space of business to business technology services, software as a service companies have found, and this is some lightly disguised data from a client of mine whom I cannot name for non-disclosure reasons. But if you just look at the degree to which a customer stays loyal and does not churn, does not change horses on you, based on how much of your solution they're actually using, and you can define that in a couple of ways: how many people in the organization use your solution, and then how deeply into your stack of capabilities they feel able to go successfully. The more you get them using your technology and your solution, the less likely they are to move on. Now, that's intuitively sensible, but you start exploring what that means, and you can count on a far longer customer lifetime, which increases customer lifetime value, if you do things at the front end of a relationship, like invest in their training, or offer free support, or even in the case of large installations, put a consultant on site with them for what appears to them to be free, clearly included in the cost of the cost you figure for the relationship. Loyal customers, it's worth spending to get customers loyal, because the payoff is at one that increases faster than you can spend. And then the other two things on the slide, on that bottom right, it's appalling to me. This is out of a LinkedIn study from last year. Just how much companies smother their prospects in order to get to the sale, and then walk away and don't have much to do until it's time to renew. And even then, I was surprised at that far right number of 36% of customers said they engaged heavily with their vendors around the time of renewal. I'm surprised that's not higher. You would think companies would not just sit back and wait for the renewals to come in, but they would actively pursue, how do we serve you better? How do we get you to stick around? And then the one that we haven't addressed yet is that one in the middle there on the bottom. Only about a quarter of customers, this is a business to consumer example, only about a quarter of customers end up purchasing again from the same vendor, which is just crazy to me. But those who do, if you can resell to the same customer, you get, in an example from Bain and Company in the financial services business, a 5% increase in customer retention led to a 25% increase in profit at the end of the day. It's worth making that investment. So the customer connection really counts.
So, Bryan, you're making a very compelling argument here. And there's a lot of data on this slide. I'm going to be moving off the slide in a moment just so that we can kind of focus more on you. But in terms of
Before you do, if anybody who's paying attention to us today or catches this on the replay would like the full material from which this material is taken, we'll share my contact information at the end. I know, just shoot me a note. I'm happy to share this and some deeper information on what it takes to retain customers and what's the value of it.
all right, so let's remind everybody, and that is not only will you be getting this slide, but in this slide deck we'll have Bryan's contact information. So if he's kind of piqued your interest on some of this data, you know, one of the things that kind of intrigued me about you is that some people might say, you know, my title's not sales, my title's not customer service, so this doesn't apply to me. And we just kind of internally, we kind of said, but you know what? It doesn't matter what your role is in an organization. You're in sales. You're either selling to an external customer or you're selling to an internal customer. And one of the things I kind of would like to ask to kind of help, you've built a business case to say, do not forget about your existing customers. That's clear with the data. Are you advising clients that they really need to double down on taking care of those existing relationships, maybe even more so than pursuing new?
No, I would not go that far. You've got to have a strong pipeline of new business. That's the lifeblood of any organization. You only get to have repeat customers who you can work with to turn into fans and loyal customers and advocates if you get a customer in the first place. So that first win is a really, really big one. What I like to close the gap on is how many of those first-time customers fail to become regular customers, loyal customers, and move on up through strata we can call fans and advocates and super users. Where I do generally find there's room to work with the size companies that are my sweet spot is it's the company that has gotten itself to the point where we've been hunting for so long, that's all we know how to do. And suddenly you wake up one morning and you're a 10 or 25 or $50 million company and, oh my gosh, I've got a whole bunch of customers and I'm not doing anything special with them. I like to help them begin to get that customer voice in. And if they're having trouble with keeping customers, even if they are spending some resources on things like customer support and retention, increasing that customer lifetime value, yes, it's well worth the investment, but no, you should not drop your efforts to bring in new customers just to get it. The examples I used, those dollar figures, tend to be for business to business companies and tend to be around the technology space, which is one of my key homes. You can adjust your numbers accordingly if you're doing business to consumer. If you're selling on Etsy or you're a caterer locally, and I've got clients who have done both these things, you might be a $500,000 a year or $1 million a year business, and there's still things you should be doing to cement your relationship with your existing customers.
We've been very blessed to have relationships that are long-term. We don't take those relationships for granted, but the data you supplied is that many companies do. They take those relationships for granted, and lo and behold, come renewal time, they wonder, well, what happened? I don't know if you're prepared to offer specifics, but one of the things I was kind of curious about is you've worked in a variety of sectors. You've seen things done well and things not done so well. Would you, to help kind of put some teeth into what we're describing here, could you share some examples of where you've seen, why don't we start with the negative example, where you see that customer service has failed and it can serve as a kind of inform us of what we should not be doing? Who comes to mind?
Yeah, well, let us not Let me
So
give
what
a,
do we
let
don't
me
have
give
to
a couple
name
of thoughts.
names.
Yeah, I will not name names of any clients. We can certainly talk about some public examples. But let me give you an example because you talked about the different marketplaces or sectors that I've worked in. Let me share a nonprofit example with you, and it'll be one where it's not so much that it seemed like anybody was doing anything wrong. It's just that it was more the omission than the commission that was the problem. A nonprofit board and executive team that I've had the chance to work with was, when we started working together, not spending time doing enough curation of current donors. You would think that would be death in the nonprofit business. It wasn't quite at that point. They were taking that customer base, if you will, that donor base, for granted. The original engagement that I was brought in for was a speech writing engagement. Work with the executive director on her remarks at an upcoming donor event that was going to mix longtime donors and friends of the nonprofit with brand new folks who had been invited to learn more about the nonprofit. I worked with the executive director on her remarks, how she talked about the organization, how she talked about how critical the donors were. But eventually we recognized, we're not doing enough to really cement the values of the organization in the heads of your donors. They're going to come to the event, they're going to have a lovely evening, some of them will bid on some auction items, and then they will walk away, and they're going to find it easy to forget about that evening. It'll be another memorable evening that they can log off on their calendar. We decided we wanted to make this evening into one that started building longer relationships that were more meaningful for both the nonprofit and their regular donors. We ended up creating, imagine you've got a room full of silent auction items, a stage in front from which a live auction was going to take place, and then ringing the room, tables filled with wineries pouring their wines as samples to go along with the food that was that was available. As the people wandered through and filled their glasses of wine, about halfway through, we had another table where we had printed up postcards with room for an address on one side, and on the other side, the values of the nonprofit and a provocative question. What do these values mean to you? Or how will you live these values? Or what of these values is most important to you and why? And we invited the people who attended the auction to stop by the booth, write out their address on the one side of the postcard, and on the other, engage with the question and write down their answer. And to demonstrate to the room that people were taking this seriously and writing interesting things, we started pinning them up on a corkboard behind the table. So imagine you're at this auction event. You've now written out your answer to a question. The reason the values of this organization resonate with me are, and you've had to emotionally connect with those values in order to talk about why they're important to you. We gave everybody an incentive to fill out these postcards. We said that once we had all the postcards up on the cork board, we were going to blindfold one of the students who was the client for the nonprofit and have her pick out a couple of them, and those people were going to win a magnum of wine. So there was an incentive to do this, but the emotional connection between writing down your emotional connection to the brand and seeing it up there and seeing other people do the same began to get people feeling closer to the organization. Let me sum up. In the end, with all of these folks having earlier in the evening made their emotional commitment to the nonprofit, we increased the take from this auction 100%, 50% year over year. It was the most successful auction they had ever had, and we had a batch of postcards that we could send out 4 months before the next year's event to everybody with save the date stickers on them that reminded them why they felt connected to this brand, this particular nonprofit. So that's a long-winded story of an organization that wasn't so much doing something wrong as just failing to do enough right. The failure I see most frequently is companies know the touch points they've got with their customers, and still they consistently fail to say just the simplest thing. Who else do you know who I should be talking to? Who are your friends? Who are the other organizations you trade with or work with where I should be in there asking for referrals, or asking, if you like what we're doing with you, can I interview you and get you on video or write a short success study or success story or case study? Because those, not only do they build connection with the existing customer, they are the fuel for getting your new business in the door at a much higher close rate with much shorter sales cycles.
So Brian, let
So
me,
I
if I
get off the
could.
soapbox now.
Well, no, we invite you are mentioning nonprofit, and I wouldn't normally have thought of nonprofit, but nonprofits in the sales area. But let me see if I've heard you correctly. You've pointed out that people need to have a sense of an emotional connection to the customer they're doing business with. And in this case, it's the organization, what the organization did. And you also are stressing the importance of asking those customers, who else should we be talking to? The importance of referrals. Can we go back to the first one for a moment? You made a comment. If a company's not real clear, if an organization's not real clear on what the emotional attachment that their customers might have with them, what would be the most practical way that you would suggest to us on how to find out, why do customers love us?
Mm-hmm. The simple, the simplest answer is the one that makes sense here. Ask them, right? The number of times I've gotten a group of customers into a focus group, whether it's a literal focus group, if you're a kind of company that goes to trade shows, that's a great way to connect with your existing customers when everybody's in the same place at the same time. We're talking about pre and eventually, please, may it please the powers that be, post coronavirus. When you've got people together, bring them together or do it virtually and just plain ask. And the answers might not actually surprise you. What will often surprise you is the places where they feel you're falling down. You mentioned before, Mike, I'm not in sales. The organizations I tend to work with inside of organizations include sales, marketing, and customer support. But I've seen examples where our finance department has no customer service skills, and yet they're the ones who customers end up on the phone with when they're already perhaps not in a great mood because they feel they've been overcharged for something, or your accounts payable, accounts receivable groups need to be every bit as customer focused as the rest of the organization. But in terms of getting started, just ask the question. What is it that keeps you coming back? And ask those nice open-ended questions that allow some expansiveness in the answer so you can start listening for themes to come through. Net promoter score is something that over the last decade or decade and a half seems to have exploded as a key measure. You've all seen it, that 0 to 10 score. On a range of 0 to 10, how likely are you to recommend our brand or product or service to someone else? And if you get people in the 9, 10 range, you've got folks who you consider strong advocates. 0 to 6 is detractors, and that 7, 8 range is, they're kind of neutral. They could go either way. They're perhaps regular customers, but not loyal customers. A local financial management firm here in Seattle, every single time they asked this question, and they asked it, I think, at 4 different times a year of their clients, right after tax time and after annual reviews and things like that. If they got anything less than a 9 or a 10, for a period of time, it was the chief operating officer of the company, and gradually that responsibility got spread out, would pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I see you say you wouldn't necessarily recommend us. Let's talk about why. That sort of instant action that gets somebody talking to you in a way where you can remediate if you've done something wrong that is singular to that organization, or start to fix a process that appears broken if the same thing has happened over and over again. Completely invaluable. Ask the question.
Bryan, we have heard you stress the importance of listening to your customer, and to listen, you need to ask. And then you just gave a good example. Don't just ask once. You cite an example of a client that asks on an ongoing basis, perhaps quarterly. But what I'm hearing you say is what you're asking for is what keeps bringing you back. What is it about what we're doing for you that keeps bringing us back? And then you said something that was really important, I think, and that is you're trying to get a sense of the emotional connection that they might have with you, not just low price, good service, but the emotional connection. If I'm hearing that correctly, I know we're going to need to move to Rhonda here in just a moment, but you've given us at least two very specific practical recommendations. One,
Let me riff to one more from what you've just said, just because that is often the question. There is every single touch point with a customer is an opportunity to ask a question, right? Whether it's in the sales cycle, whether they're interacting with, perhaps you have an app that they're interacting with, perhaps they're calling in, perhaps they're checking your website. The question that I love asking is not, do you love me? Will you refer me? Will you recommend me? It's, what problem do I solve for you? Because it's not always as apparent as it might be to the product marketers or the brand people inside of your organization. If someone's buying from you, you are solving a problem for them. It's not just that they love your price or your customer service or whatever else it is you offer that is functional. You're doing something in their life. You're heating their home or helping them get their kids safely from point A to point B. I mean, why do they love a car company? Is it because of the feeling of power when you're behind the wheel? Is it because you're safe and I know if there's an accident, God forbid, my kids are going to be okay? Is it because you're big enough to fit, the dog and the skis and take the four-wheel drive? You're solving a problem for them. If you don't know what problem you're solving for your customer, if you're just guessing, you've got room to grow and you should take advantage of it.
Bryan, I'm glad you added that. So it's not just ask, how are we doing? You're suggesting ask more specific. What problems have we been able to solve for you? And if I'm hearing you correctly, the better you understand the problems you can solve for your existing customers, it might position you well as you're out looking for new customers. You now know the problems that you solve for your current clients. Perhaps others have the same problem.
Exactly. And go back to the vignette about the nonprofit. Merely the act of answering the question, what problem do I solve for you, puts the answerer into that mindset of, I've got a problem, and the relief that you've solved it. That is creating an emotional bond that goes beyond their spend and beyond your ability to answer the phone on 2 rings or whatever it is you may take pride in. Just getting someone to emotionally and intellectually engage with a question like, why is this relationship working, actually helps feed the fact that the relationship is working. I love that sort of meta approach to it. The more you ask, the better you get, and the better results you get, sometimes just because you asked. Anyway, what is it, the Hawthorne study or something like that? That which, if people know that they're being measured, they respond a little differently. Well, when people know you care and want to know what's right about the relationship, they're giving you credit for investing in the relationship. And that's part of what keeps people coming back to you.
You know, it's interesting as we're listening to you speak, the question becomes, to what extent does this extend to other roles? For example, I think, Bryan, both Rhonda and I come from an HR background. And I'd like to kind of move to Rhonda for a few minutes. I'd like to come back to you, Bryan, here in a few minutes, if you don't mind sticking with us.
Of course.
Rhonda, he called you as we got started, kind of an HR guru. What is it you heard Bryan shared that would perhaps apply to those who are managing people, who are managing folks that really are internal customers? What did you hear that might apply to things that you see on a daily basis?
Well, I think there's actually a couple of things to kind of take off from some points that Bryan made. First of all, I think he did mention in human resources, for instance, every employee is your customer. Every person who works for the organization is your customer. And I've done, some internal customer training, customer service training in the past for all employees, because everybody has a customer. No matter what your job is, you have a customer, and your customer is whoever is the recipient of your work. So, in many companies, there's a process and work may go through a process. Well, the next person down the line in that process is your customer. So everybody has a customer, and everybody should be focused on what they can do to better serve their customer, whether it's internally or externally. I think something else sometimes that companies may not completely recognize or put a lot of time or investment into is the number of people within the organization that do touch the external customer. So an example Bryan gave is your accounting people. The way that somebody is treated by someone trying to collect payment could make a difference of whether or not they do business with that client again. So we focus a lot of time, companies focus a lot of time on training your sales people, training your customer service staff that are answering the phone, but might not recognize how many other people touch that customer. And it may not even be face-to-face, it may not even be by phone, but how what they do can touch that customer. So I think there's a few different things that companies should really be focused on, and managers should be focused on with their employees, is first of all, helping them to become aware of how what they do affects the customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer. It could be both. And also, as we talk about communication, that's tougher right now than it's ever been before. So you may not be in the same building as the people that you're managing. You may not be in the same building as people that you work with to service a customer. So it's become tougher to have the communication, the training, the coaching, the interaction with your people in the company that affect the customer. So it takes an even greater effort right now, when there's so many other distractions and different things going on, to really make sure you're taking care of your customers, and your employees and your staff know how to do that. So I think there's a few key things to really focus on right now. One is in light of COVID, you can't lose focus on what those important business things are that are affecting your customer. You can't lose focus on your customer. And I think some people have, because of all the distractions right now. So get refocused on your customer, whoever that customer may be, and make sure that you have goals set up for your employees. Again, whether it's internal or external customers, everybody should have a goal focused on improving service to their customer, having measurable objectives to know how they're doing in terms of reaching their customer. And as Bryan said, the best way to find out is ask them. Find ways to ask your customer, even if it's internally. Go to the person who's receiving work as a result of what you're doing and ask them, how am I doing? Is this getting you what you need to do your job? How can I do better to make your job easier for you? So have ways to be able to build that interaction even internally to make sure people are finding ways to service their customer better. And then, of course, training. There's so many different elements of training to make sure people are taking care of customers. Communication is an obvious one. Another one is, again, recognizing who your customer is and what their needs are, but providing the training and coaching to people to know how to do that. Some people don't know how to do that, and we make assumptions sometimes. For instance, if you hire somebody in customer service and they have previous customer service experience, well, you make an assumption that they know how to service a customer, but they might not know how to service a customer in the way you want them to, or they might not be doing as much as they could be doing to improve that or accelerate it within your business. So educating people on how what they do impacts your customer, how what they do impacts repeat business with the customer and impacts the bottom line, and how that comes back to benefit them. And it can be clerical people. It can be, again, accounting people. It can be people on the plant floor in a manufacturing environment, but really helping them and teaching them to understand how what they do every day impacts the customer and how they can improve that. So it's a big element, I think, of awareness. And again, it's tougher now when you don't have necessarily everybody in one spot, when you don't probably have face-to-face contact with your customers. So some of the training right now might be making sure people have the technology they need, making sure the technology they need is working, making sure that the technology that you're using works for your customers, that it's effective in reaching them. So finding ways that you can train and coach your employees to make sure they're getting what the customer needs when the customer needs it in a way that works for them today, because it's different today than it was last year. It's different for people who might have been very effective meeting one-on-one in person with customers. They might not have the same skill set to do that electronically or virtually as we may have to do now. So taking a look at what type of retraining you might need to do, what type of coaching or mentoring that you can do with your employees to have them set up with the skill sets and with the tools that they need to ensure that your customers are getting what they're looking for. And again, I think something else Bryan said is it's a lot easier to try to get a repeat customer than to get a new customer. So nurturing those relationships, finding ways to make sure you're staying in touch with people, maybe not always just to sell, but just to stay in touch so they know who you are and you have that relationship, and having goals around those types of activities too. Maybe not just sales numbers, but how many times have you touched this customer? How many times have you had interaction with the customer? What has the feedback from the customer been? So having those types of measurements and goals in place that nurture the relationships that will result in repeat business, that will want to make people do business with you. Same with employees. How are you touching the employees? How are you interacting with them? I've said for years in HR, you can't really sit in an HR office and try to figure out what's important to your employees. Go out and ask them. Mm-hmm. Ask them, why are you working here? What do you like about working here? How could it be better? What would you be looking for that would make this an even better experience for you? So, a lot of people do customer service surveys, employee surveys, but there's nothing better than having that interaction with people verbally, one-on-one, to really get more detail than you're going to get on a piece of paper with a multiple choice question. So just ask people, take the time to interact and ask people, and you're going to get so much more feedback to help improve the relationship, which again, whether it's an employee, whether it's a customer, you want to have that person want to be there, want to stay, want to do business with you, which makes your job a lot easier to not have to go out and find new people.
What Rhonda knows, but Bryan may not know, is we're not sure what you're going to be saying, Bryan. And it's always very affirming to hear an expert like you come and share your insights that I think dovetail very nicely with what Rhonda just said. Rhonda, I don't know if I took good notes here, but what I heard you say is times like this is a time to really refocus on customers, not only external customers, but in this case, we're talking about the internal customers. It could be employees. It could be people who you interact with from department to department. So you're saying this is a time to be keenly aware of who the customer is, what their problems are, understand the kind of problems that they solve. You also said that you can't just do that without making it more a specific objective. Bryan made reference that he has a client that quarterly would go out and ask those questions. So it sounds as if you're going to have a goals, put it in writing so everybody knows what we're trying to do to improve awareness internally. And then you emphasize the importance of training. If you, in asking these questions internally and externally, realize that you don't have the skill sets in place, this is the right time to be doing that. Bryan, I want to turn to you. I was watching you listen to Rhonda and your head was nodding a lot.
Oh,
I know
I was,
that you speak to HR groups, you speak to the Society for Resource Management all over your region. To what extent did what Rhonda say and what you would say to that group, are we somewhat in sync here?
yeah, right. Yes, I was nodding my head a lot because Rhonda's a poster child for some of the lessons that I like to teach. A couple of weeks back, I was the guest speaker on a webinar, a little mini training workshop for the 16 or 17 chapters of the Society for HR Managers in California. And we workshopped all around language. And Rhonda, when I heard you talk about, think about what you can do to serve employees who are remote right now. You can help make sure their technology is working, help them get connected. It reminded me of the exercise that we ran where think about the difference between answering a question if you're in HR as a profession. What do you do? Well, I do recruiting. Think about that answer versus I help make sure that we have the right people on our team to accomplish the goals that the company has and see our mission through and help our customers achieve their goals. Think about the difference between I work in IT versus I make sure that our people, wherever they are able to be as productive as they possibly can be. And there's an old story that I've heard a million times from what I do. I don't know how widely known it is generally, but the story goes, who knows if it's true, but it's a good one. And why let the veracity get in the way of a good story, right? After John Kennedy gave the speech that said, we will put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, he was down in Houston or in Texas, Texas or Florida. I don't recall which it might have been. And there was someone whose job was not immediately apparent. And the president asked, what is it you do? And this person who was sweeping floors or whatever it was said, I'm working to put a man on the moon, Mr. President. Right? You may be sweeping the floors, but if you define your job via a mission and you talk about the outcome that you're going to get and the impact that you're going to have, now you're communicating effectively. And that is great if you're in HR and you want to elevate the conversation from I'm in recruiting to I'm helping build the best team possible. And it works if you are a brand about to come out with a new product and you want to get away from talking about features and start moving towards benefits. Anyway, yeah, lots of great stuff in what Rhonda said. It's all about the mindset that you take in and then how you articulate that mindset in a way that's audience focused, benefit led, and then builds with stories and facts to really make the point and bring it home emotionally to your audience.
Bryan, you raise an interesting point. When we work with clients who want to do a better job planning, what they also realize that they oftentimes struggle with, it's not so much the strategic planning that's the challenge, it's the execution of that plan. One reason why the execution of that plan is so troubling is that people don't really understand the plan. And this goes back to communication. So your illustration of someone who is sweeping, who has connected how what their job is connects to a higher goal. The same could be applied to an organization. If people within the organization understand what the organization is about, and you do that by sometimes asking your own customers, what problems do we solve? And then departments within that organization get a better understanding of how they contribute to that. And then individuals within the department see how what they do fits into a greater whole. it's really kind of neat to hear you say that, because it all kind of comes back together. Rhonda, I know you covered a number of important points. It's the importance of staying focused, the importance of being very intentional and setting goals, and recognizing that things are changing so fast that, yes, you might have done some training 3 years back, but a lot has happened in 3 years. What else would you add as we start to wrap up that we've not covered that you think would be helpful for the folks who are tuning in?
Well, I think just in today's environment and trying to bring things more current, don't lose focus on who your customer is and making sure everyone in your organization knows who their customer is, and that you're providing them with the coaching, with the training, with the knowledge that they need to effectively take care of your customers, whether they're internal or external. And knowing that the type of training you might be doing today is different than what you would have done last year. And whether it's online, whether it's in small groups, whether it's one-on-one coaching, just make sure you're continuing to provide that education and opportunity to your people, because they will continue to move your business forward if you provide them the tools to do that. But just not keeping their skills current or expecting that they're going to figure out how to do it is probably not going to be effective. So make sure you're focusing on what it is your employees need to continue to focus on your customers.
Has kind of become our pattern, the last part of our time together, I like kind of going back and forth between, in this case, Ryan and Rhonda. So I'm going to come back to you, Bryan, as we kind of wrap up our time together. We've tried to pack a lot into this time together. What might you add to what Rhonda just said? Some things that you want to make sure are important takeaways for the folks who are with us today.
Thank you, Mike and Rhonda. It's been a pleasure joining you today. So thanks for the opportunity. Yeah, as we wrap up, I want to reflect on both the last part of your question, Mike, to Rhonda, and then Rhonda's answer. It is messages need to come out, and they need to come out consistently in a way that gets everybody's mind focused on the mission. And while that absolutely needs to be executed at the lowest level of an organization where the customer touch happens, again, whether that customer is truly a paying customer or an employee or an investor or a partner, whoever's in your ecosystem, the messaging has to begin at the top. There has to be a strong mission-focused communication that ripples through the organization so that the worker who's sweeping the floors understands that what she's doing is contributing to the overall mission of the organization. I work with one software company that serves nonprofits. Their software helps run nonprofits, and they view their mission as enabling the mission of the nonprofits to do good in their respective areas around the world. They actually measure their success by the fundraising success of their clients, not by their own sales numbers. It's a turned on its head way of thinking about these things, but it's what works. So getting your communications right and having a strong mission-led emotional message, and then building the programs both to engage your customers and to listen to them better, and building that culture that appreciates what your customers are saying and can turn it into action. That's where I'd leave this conversation. It's about getting all of those things working synchronously so that your whole organization is focused on serving that customer along their journey, not along their journey of buying from you, but along their journey of fulfilling their mission.
Wonderful way to kind of begin wrapping up our time together, Bryan. I want to get to the slide that has your contact information, but before I do that, I want to kind of give folks something what they can look forward to. We have been so fortunate to have high quality panelists like Bryan join us, and I'm looking forward, and I trust you will be, to this time next Thursday on the 3rd. Victoria Baylor is going to be joining us. And it's interesting, we've been talking about customers, we've been talking about how do you get the message out. Victoria is a brand expert, but her expertise is helping us build our personal brand. So we've got a little bit of a theme going here. How do you build your personal brand? So what she's specifically going to do is help us get a better feel for what might be the blind spots that might be affecting personal brand. We may have lost Rhonda, but I would want to kind of remind those who have joined us, who you don't really know who Bench Builders is. Our organization, in short, we're there to help organizations, specifically leaders who find themselves kind of stuck, get unstuck. I think you all know our background is in HR, but if something has come up today or on previous webinars that kind of highlights, yikes, I don't like where we are, I want to get unstuck, let us hear from you. We want to do just that. Here is Bryan's contact information, and I know he would love to hear from you. I suspect you would also be open to any LinkedIn requests for connections.
Absolutely. Would love if you found something meaningful and useful in this conversation today and want to see future thinking in the form of anything I publish on the website or on partner sites or on LinkedIn, by all means, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to get to know you. And if you've got a great customer success story or a customer failure to customer success story, I do a lot of public speaking. I do a certain amount of writing. I am just a sponge for stories. So if you've got a great story about a brand you love and you want to talk about why, I'd love to hear from you. Get in touch. And if you'd like look at a recent publication that I put out on 10 things you can do to build closer customer relationships, just shoot me a note and I'll be happy to get it into your hands. Thanks for the opportunity.
Ronnie, good to have you back. Bryan, as expected, you're easy to chat with. You know your stuff, and you've given us a lot of good information to act on. Rhonda, as has become our norm, I really enjoy spending time with you. We've got Bryan in Seattle. We have Rhonda, who is in Harrison, Tennessee, and I'm in Dalton, Georgia. But I want to say thank you for the folks who have taken the time to be with us this morning, or the folks who are going to be spending time listening to this webinar later. We're very flattered that you would be with us. We hope you have found value to this. We hope that you will join us again this time next week as we bring Victoria here to kind of learn about how we build a personal brand. So on behalf of Bench Builders, I'm Mike O'Neill, Rhonda Beard, and our expert panelist, Bryan Rutberg. Thank you to the both of you. Thank you all for being with us. Go, be safe, and we hope to see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Bryan.